I'm holding a cashier's check for $5,000, mailed from a corporate office in Denver, with a memo line that reads, "Consulting fee," for the tea lounge I built with my own hands and $74,000 of my late husband's life insurance. I'll give you the ending first. My daughter now spends 8 hours a day in a back room hand-sorting tea leaves while wearing a laminated badge that says, Brewed Betrayal. And every tin I ship today has a QR code that links directly to the federal court docket, where she was convicted of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. But how we got there, that's not a story about revenge. It's a story about a dusty wooden tea caddy, a dead man's hidden warning, and what you discover when you finally stop trusting the people who should have loved you most. My name isn't important. I'm 52 years old, and for 28 years I was a master tea blender and buyer for a mid-sized specialty importer. I could tell the moisture content of an Assam just by rubbing it between my fingers, and I knew exactly how many grams of smoky lapsang souchong would balance the stone fruit notes of a first-flush Darjeeling without overwhelming the palate. I could identify a tea's origin by the shape of its rolled leaves and the way the tips unfurled in hot water, a skill that came from decades of cupping hundreds of samples a season. I also, for a few years in my 20s, worked as a legal secretary in a small firm that did a lot of estate planning. I notarized thousands of documents, learned to spot a fake notary stamp from 20 paces, and I know that a genuine embossed seal leaves a faint indentation you can feel with your fingertip even if the ink fades. That's a fact that's going to matter. My husband Tom was a quiet architect of everything good in my life, an industrial engineer who could fix anything with a wrench and a roll of duct tape. When he died of pancreatic cancer 2 years ago, the life insurance payout was $74,000 after the medical bills, and I poured every cent of it into a dream. A custom blend tea lounge with my only daughter, Cassie. We had a lawyer named Harold Sutherland, a patient man with a bow tie and a stamp collection, draw up an operating agreement that gave me 50% ownership and Cassie the other 50%. He notarized it in his office on a Tuesday afternoon, pressed the embossed seal into the paper, and filed it with the Colorado Secretary of State. I remember him telling us, "This is the bones of your business. Never lose the original." I kept a copy in a fireproof box, and Tom, unbeknownst to me, kept a digital copy in a place I wouldn't discover for years. The lounge was called Verdant Silhouette, a name Cassie picked from a poetry anthology. I formulated the flagship blend, a tea I named Smoke and Orchards in memory of Tom, a mixture of aged oolong, smoked black tea, dried apricot, and a whisper of lapsang. It smelled like his workshop after he'd been soldering, and then peeled an orange. Cassie was charming and photogenic, and knew exactly how to stage a tasting flight for Instagram with edible flowers and slate boards. I knew how to source whole-leaf tea from a single estate in Fujian, how to negotiate freight contracts, and how to balance a P&L statement so precisely that we turned a profit in our 4th month. It should have worked. 6 months in, Cassie married a slick marketing manager named Justin, a man who wore $700 loafers and leased a German sedan he couldn't afford. The first time I met him, he complimented the brand narrative, and then asked if I could lend him $2,000 to cover a surprise tax lien. I should have seen it then. The rot was slow, a quiet percolation beneath the surface, and I was too busy blending the next seasonal release to notice the cracks spreading through my own family. The tight part is over. 8 weeks ago, I fell down the basement stairs carrying a crate of sample tins and hit my head hard enough to give me a grade 2 concussion. The fog was real. Words slipped sideways, and I'd lose whole afternoons. Within the hour, Cassie and Justin were at my door with overnight bags, talking in hushed, gentle tones about how I couldn't be alone in this condition, how they'd handle everything while I recovered. They moved into the guest room, rerouted my mail to Justin's P.O. box, and started going through every drawer in Tom's old study. I was too dizzy to argue. The house I'd shared with Tom for 30 years suddenly felt like a museum being cataloged by strangers, and each time I heard a drawer slide open, my stomach clenched. The air felt thick, and I noticed they'd unplugged the landline, leaving only their cell phones. I pretended to sleep a lot, watching them through barely open lashes as they photographed Tom's old ledgers and muttering about valuations. On the 3rd day, I shuffled into the study and saw Cassie holding a small wooden tea caddy in one hand, the one Tom had carved from cherry wood for our 20th anniversary. Its lid was warped and the finish was dull. She wrinkled her nose and said, "This is falling apart, Mom. It's just a dust collector." And she dropped it into a black contractor bag full of things destined for the dump. Justin nodded from the corner, already thumbing through a file folder. I said nothing. I felt the floor tilt. I went back to the couch and waited, my heart pounding a slow, sick rhythm. That night, after they'd gone to their room and I could hear the low murmur of their television, I crept into the garage. The bag was heavy and cold, the plastic crinkling in the dark. I lifted out the caddy, cradling it against my chest, and carried it back to my room like stolen treasure. My hands were shaking, but not from the concussion. I knew that caddy had a false bottom Tom had built to hide the key to our safety deposit box, a secret we'd shared and never told Cassie. We used to use it for little surprises, a love note, a piece of chocolate. I slid a butter knife along the felt-lined seam, just as Tom had showed me, and the base popped loose with a soft click. Inside, there was no key. Instead, I found a folded sheet of lined paper and a tiny USB flash drive, the kind you'd get free at a conference, still in its original yellow plastic sleeve. The note was written in Tom's increasingly unsteady handwriting from his final months, the ink pressed so hard it had grooved the paper. It read, "Cassie forged my signature on a power of attorney last spring. Justin was behind it. I never told you because I wanted to protect you while I was dying, but you have to know now. Do not trust them. Save yourself. The drive has everything." Beneath that, in smaller letters, "I'm sorry I couldn't fix this before I left." I stared at those words while the grief of 2 years collapsed into something jagged and hyper-alert. My husband from the grave had just told me our daughter had already tried to steal from him, and now she was in my house, managing my mail. I gripped the edge of the nightstand, the wood cool under my sweating palm, and forced my concussed brain into the kind of focus Tom always said I had, that stubborn, dogged, find-the-loose-thread focus that had once kept a struggling tea importer alive through a trade war. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that a parent's love should never be exploited for greed. Now, let's get into what happened next. Cassie and Justin didn't waste a day. The next morning I was still nursing a headache and pretending to be much foggier than I actually was, and they sat me down at the kitchen table with a stack of crisp, freshly printed forms. The smell of the paper and the faint chemical tang of laser jet toner was so ordinary, but it felt like a prelude to a sentencing. Justin did the talking, his voice all cream and concern. "We've been talking to a financial advisor, and with your memory issues, it's just so important to have a durable power of attorney in place, so we can pay the bills and keep the tea lounge running. And this quitclaim deed for the house is just a precaution, Mom, so if anything happens to you, the property doesn't get tied up in probate. We're just protecting you." The deed was titled Special Warranty Deed and had a legal description of my property that ran 5 lines, including the lot number and the county parcel ID. It transferred ownership to Cassie Hall, effective upon recording, with no consideration listed aside from love and affection. The power of attorney was a 12-page document drafted by an online service, granting Cassie and Justin jointly the authority to open and close bank accounts, sell real estate, and make healthcare decisions. I held the paper at an angle to catch the light and saw the font was mismatched in Section 3, a telltale sign of a cut-and-paste template. Cassie nodded, her eyes wide and wet. I watched her left index finger tap the table 3 times, the same tell she'd had since she was a child lying about a broken vase. I let my voice go soft and slurry. "My head is still swimming, sweetheart. I think I need a lawyer to look at these before I sign anything. Can we wait a few days?" Justin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a tiny muscle twitched below his left ear, but Cassie patted my hand. "Of course, Mom, just rest." They didn't push. They didn't need to. They thought I was mentally compromised and isolated, and they had all the time in the world. That same afternoon, they announced I'd be much more comfortable recovering at their house, and that evening they packed my things and moved me into their guest room, a converted attic space with a single window that looked out at the side of a neighbor's garage. The walls were thin, and the ceiling sloped so low I could only stand upright in the center of the room. I let them. I needed to be inside their world to find the rest of the evidence. I tucked the USB drive and my old laptop into my bag beneath a folded sweater, and I made sure to pack the small pocket knife Tom had given me years ago, a slim Swiss Army model with a blade that I'd sharpened on a whetstone every spring. The first week in that house, I was an invisible patient. I shuffled around in slippers, drank tea they brought me, took naps, and they treated me like a piece of furniture. But I listened, every waking moment, cataloging sounds. Cassie's phone was a loud, careless thing, and Justin took his calls on the deck just below the attic window, never realizing that the old single-pane glass carried every word like a megaphone. The first call I heard was on a Tuesday morning. Justin was pacing, and I could hear the crunch of his loafers on the pressure-treated wood. He said, "I know the deadline is Friday, but the amendment we filed isn't holding up. The buyer's in-house counsel says the notary stamp looks off, and they are running a verification check. If they find out the notary doesn't exist, the whole deal collapses. We need her signature on the release by Friday or Crimson Brew walks." A pause then. "No, Gary, we cannot forge her signature again. They've already flagged the last one. We need it live. We need a real notary present and her actual hand on the pen. The old lady is still concussed. She'll sign anything if we time it right." Crimson Brew was the acquiring chain, a national brand with cafes in 12 states. I'd tasted their Earl Grey once and found it flat. Now I knew they were offering $980,000 for my recipes and my trademarks, a number I would later confirm in their asset purchase agreement. But the sale was contingent on a clean chain of title, and the forged amendment Cassie had filed 6 months ago was already crumbling under scrutiny. The second call came 2 days later, while I was pretending to doze in a recliner in their living room. Cassie was in the kitchen and had her phone on speaker, probably forgetting I was there. I heard her say, "Justin, we can't wait for the lawyer to clear it. If we can't get her signature, we'll have to destroy the original amendment and just say it never existed. But the operating agreement on file with the state still shows her as 50% owner, so we'd have to undo that too." Justin's voice crackled through the speaker. "And how exactly do we undo a notarized document filed with the state? We can't, Cass. The only path is the release. So make sure your mother stays compliant. Dose her chamomile with a little extra. Keep her calm." I kept my eyelids heavy and recorded every word in my memory, mouthing the phrase, "dose her chamomile," silently, a bitter little mantra. A third call, this one from a harsh-voiced creditor, came in the next afternoon while I was in the upstairs bathroom, pressing my ear against the vent. Justin answered his cell in the hallway, his voice a defensive hiss. "I told you, the cash is coming. I've got a deal closing by month's end. You'll get your $61,500. Just back off until the 14th. I memorized the number and the date. Then, that same evening, I overheard Cassie on a video call with a friend from her old job, laughing about how Mom's basically a vegetable now. It's actually kind of convenient. The friend's voice said, "Aren't you worried she'll snap out of it?" Cassie replied, "She's 52 with a head injury and no allies. Where's she going to go?" I sat on the attic stairs, the rough wood pressing into my thighs, and I felt a cold, clarifying rage settle into my bones like an old friend. I began my undercover investigation the next morning. Tom had taught me basic lock work because we once had a filing cabinet in the garage that jammed and we couldn't find the key, and he showed me how to use a tension wrench and a pick. He'd sit on a stool with a practice lock, his thick fingers surprisingly nimble as he explained the feel of setting each pin. "Listen for the click, but feel for the give," he'd said. "That's the sheer line. You don't force it. You coax it." I kept a small kit in the bottom of my toolbox back home, but in their house I had to improvise. I watched through the attic window as their cars pulled out of the driveway on a Thursday around 10 in the morning, off to meet with what Justin had described the night before as a hard money lender who doesn't ask too many questions. The house fell silent. I crept downstairs, found the garage, and scanned the clutter. A broken windshield wiper lay in a corner, its spring steel blade perfect for a tension wrench. I unscrewed it from the arm, then used a pair of pliers from a kitchen junk drawer to bend a small 90-degree hook at one tip. I unbent a jumbo paperclip, formed a tiny upward hook at the end, and then filed the tip to a dull point with a nail file from the bathroom. I slipped my makeshift tools into the pocket of my cardigan, each movement slow and deliberate to keep the concussion haze from making me fumble. Their home office was a converted den with a cheap hollow core door. The lock was a basic privacy knob, the kind that pops open with a straightened coat hanger. I shimmed it in seconds and stepped inside, the door closing behind me with a soft click. The real prize was a 2-drawer vertical filing cabinet in the corner, painted beige, dented, the sort of thing you buy at a second-hand office supply store. Its lock was a 5-wafer model, a little trickier but still a cousin to the practice locks Tom had taught me on. I knelt on the thin carpet, the fibers leaving dents in my knees, slid my tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, and applied light torque with my right hand. I inserted the paperclip pick and began raking gently across the wafers, feeling each one lift against the spring. The first wafer set with a soft metal tick. The second. The third fought me, offering that characteristic gritty resistance of a wafer that's slightly misaligned from wear. I had to ease off the tension, reset the plug, and try a shallower angle, wiggling the pick just barely. My breath fogged the metal. On the fourth pass, all 5 wafers aligned, and the plug rotated with a satisfying chunk. I slid the drawer open and found a hanging folder labeled Verdant Affairs, thick as a phone book. Inside, the forged amendment was the first thing I pulled. 2 pages, dated 6 months prior, with a notary block stamped and signed. The document claimed I'd voluntarily relinquished all ownership interest in Verdant Silhouette to Cassie for $10. My signature was a clumsy approximation. The loop on my E was reversed, and my R ended in a blunt squiggle instead of the sharp downward stroke I always use. And the ink was too fresh and even, like it had been traced from a guide rather than signed naturally. The notary stamp claimed to belong to A. Marjorie Lennox, Notary Public, El Paso County. Commission number 2021-05487, expiring July 2026. But I held the paper under the desk lamp and felt the surface with my fingertip. No ridge, no indentation. A genuine embossed seal cannot hide from a trained fingertip because the metal die compresses the paper fibers, leaving a permanent topographical map. This one was as flat as a photocopy, the ink sitting on the surface like a glossy decal. I pulled out my phone, navigated to the Colorado Secretary of State's notary verification portal, and typed in the commission number. No record. I searched the name. Nothing. The notary didn't exist. Behind the amendment, I found the asset purchase agreement between Verdant Silhouette and Crimson Brew Holdings, LLC, dated 2 weeks after the forgery. It listed the purchase price as $980,000, broken down line by line. $250,000 of that was allocated to the smoke and orchards, trademark and proprietary blend formulations, $400,000 to goodwill, and the rest to physical assets and inventory. The signature block showed Cassie as sole owner. Clipped to the agreement was a letter from Crimson Brew's legal counsel, a firm called Hodel and Crane, requesting documentation establishing a clear chain of title for all intellectual property assets, and noting that the amendment had been flagged for review due to inconsistencies in the notary authentication metadata. Justin's handwritten notes in the margin read, "Stall them, tell them it's been resolved. We'll get live signature next week." I photographed every page with my phone, carefully holding the paper flat against the drawer to avoid blur. Then I found the receipt. It was tucked in a plastic sleeve, printed on cheap thermal paper from a company called Sealmakers Express based in Singapore. The order was for 1 custom rubber notary stamp, with the commission number 2021-05487, the name Marjorie Lennox, and the instruction, "Please use consistent ink, no emboss." The order was placed from Justin's personal email address, billed to his Visa card ending in 4457, and the IP address geolocated to their home router. The purchase confirmation timestamp was 3 weeks before the forged amendment's date. I held it to the light and saw the faint ghosts of old credit card numbers on the thermal paper, a common flaw that made the document feel more real. I photographed it, front and back. I also found a folder labeled Loans, stuffed with 3 maxed-out credit card statements totaling almost $89,000, a home equity line of credit with a variable rate that had already adjusted upward twice, a payday loan with a 399% APRA borrowed against an imaginary future sale, and a collection notice from a law firm threatening to garnish wages. There was also a printed email from a Gary Schreier that read, "Justin, if the Crimson deal falls through, these creditors will eat you alive. Get the old woman's signature this week or I'm out." Cassie and Justin were a capillary action of debt, each drop pulling them further into a vacuum, and my signature was the only thing that could stop the bleed. I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, closed the drawer, and relocked the cabinet, listening for the soft click of the wafers falling back into place. Then I went back to the attic, removed my shoes, and sat on the bed staring at the ceiling while my mind assembled a mosaic of criminal intent. Back in the attic, I plugged Tom's USB drive into my old laptop. The drive contained a single folder named Proof. Inside was a scanned PDF of our original notarized operating agreement, the one with my signature and Cassie's, notarized by Harold Sutherland, commission verified and active, every page crisp and bearing the raised seal's unmistakable ghost in the scan. Next to that was a file called Timestamp Certificate and a text document titled Read Me First. Tom had written a brief letter, his voice so clear in the words that I could almost hear the tired rasp of his final days. "My dearest," he typed, "if you're reading this, Cassie has shown her true colors. I knew after she forged that power of attorney last spring. I was too weak to confront her, but I made sure you'd have a way to prove the truth. I used a digital trust anchoring service called Chronos Mark. It takes a cryptographic hash of a document and records it on an immutable distributed ledger with a time stamp. The certificate is linked to the original PDF's SHA 256 hash, and the recovery phrase is on the back of my note. This is a dead man's switch only you can trigger. Use it. I love you." I flipped over the paper note and found the 12-word mnemonic. Foxglove Lantern Quarry Dusk Amber Stitch Almond Barrel Current Velvet Hollow. I typed it into the Chronos Mark verification portal, my fingers steady despite the tremor in my chest. The screen lit up with a green validation badge. Timestamp 8 months before the forged amendment, biometrically tied to Tom's identity at his laptop's fingerprint reader, irrevocably proving the original agreement was the genuine article. The recovery phrase also linked to a private, encrypted repository that held the original PDF and a digital signature from Harold Sutherland himself, who had, it turned out, also registered as a verified notary on the same ledger. I stared at the screen for a long time, my husband's final act of protection glowing in the dim attic light, and I let myself cry once, hard and silent, before I wiped my eyes and got to work. The next step was to bring in professionals. I bought a prepaid burner phone at a gas station during a short, unsupervised walk, using cash from a folded 20-eyed hidden in my coat lining. I called Harold Sutherland from the burner. He was retired now, gardening in Arizona, but he remembered my name immediately, and the warmth in his voice was like a door opening after a long winter. I told him what I'd found, summarizing the false notary, the forged amendment, the debt, and the Chronos Mark certificate. He was silent for a moment, the kind of silence a lawyer uses to think, then said, "I'll pull the original file from my vault. I've got a contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Denver, a woman named Diane Okonkwo. She handles art and IP fraud, and she's got a reputation for putting forgers away. She'll want this. Give me an hour." An hour later, he called back with a number and a brief introduction. I phoned Diane and we agreed to meet at a busy coffee shop downtown where the noise would cover our conversation. I slipped out early the next day, claiming a doctor's appointment and telling Cassie I'd taken Uber, though I caught a bus 2 blocks away. Diane was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, wearing a navy blazer and carrying a slim briefcase with a biometric lock. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the forged amendment, the Singapore receipt, the loan files, and the Chronos Mark certificate. I handed her a printout of the recovery phrase and the verification screen, and she studied them under her reading glasses. When I finished, she set her coffee down and said, "Mrs. Hall, this is one of the cleanest paper trails I've ever seen. We can build a federal case on wire fraud, trademark counterfeiting, and conspiracy. But to add elder exploitation and catch them in the act, I need you to participate in a controlled confrontation. We'll set a meeting at Crimson Brew's legal office. You'll go in wearing a wire. The FBI will be in an adjacent room. When they present the release document and you refuse, we'll move in. Can you do that?" I said yes without hesitating. Diane reached into her bag and handed me a small recording device about the size of a matchbook with a thin microphone wire that clipped inside a bra strap. She showed me how to activate it by pressing a tiny button twice, and we practiced a few sentences while she confirmed the transmission on her earpiece. "Keep it turned on from the moment you enter," she said. "And remember, let them incriminate themselves. Don't show your cards until they've laid all theirs on the table. The moment you speak the truth, the agents will move." I tucked the device into my handbag and left the coffee shop feeling like a spy in my own life. But first, I needed absolute moral certainty. I needed to know if my daughter had any humanity left, if the girl who once tucked dandelions behind my ear had been entirely consumed by greed. So I staged a medical crisis. I spent 2 days practicing in secret. I stood in the attic, timing the dizzy spells I still genuinely had, charting the length of each vertigo episode on a scrap of paper, and choreographed a fall that would look real. I loosened a shoelace to trip on the stair carpet, wore a long dress to hide my knees, and memorized the way to crumple without bracing my arms, letting my body go slack as I'd seen patients do in the hospital. On a Thursday afternoon, while Justin was out at an appointment with a lawyer and Cassie was in the kitchen scrolling through a design template for the new tea lounge she planned to open with her payout, I walked halfway down the stairs, grabbed the banister, and let my legs buckle. I hit the landing with a thud that vibrated through the floorboards. I lay with my eyes closed, one arm twisted under me, breathing in short, shallow gasps, my cheek pressing into the cool wood. The kitchen was 20 feet away. I heard the scrape of a chair, footsteps slow and unhurried, then Cassie's voice flat and cold. "Mom, Mom!" No panic, just irritation. I felt her step over my legs, her shoe brushing my shin without any hesitation. She didn't kneel. She didn't touch my face or check my pulse. She leaned over to grab my purse from the hook by the door, and I heard the zipper. Then Justin's voice from somewhere behind her. He must have come home without my hearing. "Is she still breathing? Whatever, just get the papers." Cassie said, "If she dies now, the estate goes to probate and we lose the whole thing anyway. You need her signature first." Justin laughed, a short, ugly sound like a cough. "She'll wake up, she always does. Remember the time she fell out of the apple tree and was fine in an hour?" Cassie's tone turned clinical, a voice I'd never heard from her. "Fine. Get the release document from the folder. If she's breathing, we can try to get a mark. But if she doesn't come around, I already downloaded the death certificate forms from the county website. Probate would take 6 months, but we could liquidate the estate if we can get past the fact that she never signed the quitclaim. The house is still in her name, so we'd have to file a small estate affidavit and hope they don't notice the deed wasn't recorded. But even then, the creditors are crawling." I lay on that cold hardwood for 20 long minutes while they debated the logistics of my potential death, discussing the probate timeline, the necessity of a funeral that looked normal, and whether my cremation would be cheaper than burial. I felt the last, frayed thread of maternal loyalty snap like a dry twig. The woman who had once sung lullabies to me as a child, whose fevered forehead I'd cooled with washcloths, was now a stranger discussing death certificate forms over my prone body. When they finally walked back to the kitchen, I stirred slowly, groaning as if regaining consciousness, and let them half carry me to the sofa. Cassie pressed a cold glass of water into my hand and said, "You gave us a scare, Mom. Just rest." Her smile was a porcelain mask, and behind it I could see the faint, stale scent of the chamomile they'd been pressing on me, now laced, I suspected, with something that made my tongue tingle. I sipped the water and smiled back, a weak, confused smile, and inside I was colder than a stone. That night I called Diane from the burner and told her I was ready. She confirmed the meeting for the following Thursday, and we reviewed the plan. I would travel with Cassie and Justin to the Denver offices of Hodel and Crane, Crimson Brew's corporate counsel, where the final signing was supposed to occur. The FBI would have an observation post in the office next door, and they'd execute on my verbal signal, which was to be the line, "Your father knew you were capable of this." We rehearsed it 3 times. The confrontation day arrived. The morning of, Cassie brushed my hair with the gentlest strokes, humming a tune from my own childhood, and cooed about how much she loved me. Justin drove us downtown, his hands tight on the steering wheel, and he coached me in a steady stream. "You just have to sign where they tell you, Mom, and then we'll take you out for lunch. There's a French patisserie across the street. You like the almond croissants, remember?" I nodded and mumbled about wanting a scone, my voice deliberately weak. The office was on the 18th floor, all glass and polished concrete, the kind of space where the air smells of ozone and money. A young associate in a suit led us into a conference room where a stack of documents had been fanned out on a mahogany table. A notary was already seated in the corner, a real one this time, a middle-aged woman with a state-issued stamp, a bound notary journal, and a small webcam broadcasting to a secure server. Because Crimson Brew was doing everything by the book now that they suspected the amendment was fraudulent but couldn't prove it without my cooperation. Cassie guided me into a leather chair, and Justin placed a fountain pen in my right hand, his fingers curling around mine with a showy tenderness that made my skin crawl. I looked down at the release document. The title read, Consent to Assignment of Trademark and Waiver of Interest. I read it out loud slowly, letting my voice clear and sharpen for the first time in weeks. Acknowledgement of sole ownership by Cassie Hall, release of all claims, waiver of right to contest. I paused and looked up at Cassie, whose smile was twitching at the edges. She said, "It's just a formality, Mom." I set the pen down. I said, quiet and very calm, "I know what a notary stamp looks like, Cassie. I know that Marjorie Lennox doesn't exist. I know you forged my signature on the amendment, and I know you sold my life's work to Crimson Brew for $980,000 while I was sleeping off a concussion in your guest room. The funny thing is, your father knew you were capable of this before he died. He left me a note and a blockchain time-stamped copy of our original agreement. It's already in the hands of the U.S. attorney. And I have a receipt for the fake notary stamp Justin ordered from Singapore, along with your loan files, your creditor calls, and the fact that you discussed dosing my chamomile tea." Cassie's face drained to ash in visible stages, the color leaving her cheeks like water from a sink. Justin stepped forward, reaching for the pen, his voice suddenly a snarl. "You old fool, you have no idea what you're doing." That's when the conference room door opened. The young associate held it wide as Diana Conquo walked in, followed by 2 FBI agents in dark suits, their badges already visible. The agents identified themselves and placed both Cassie and Justin under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy to commit trademark counterfeiting, and, because the wire had also captured them discussing my death during the staged collapse, attempted elder exploitation with an enhancement for a vulnerable victim. They cuffed Justin first, his loafers scuffing frantically on the polished floor as he babbled about insurance and bad legal advice. Cassie just stared at me with a look I'd never seen in 31 years of raising her, a look of pure, undiluted contempt, and she said nothing. The compliance officer, a woman named Sharon with a calm voice, shook my hand and quietly told me that Crimson Brew would be voiding the fraudulent sale, and that they'd be open to a legitimate licensing arrangement if I was interested. I said I might be, under new terms. The trial was short because the evidence was overwhelming. The Chronos Mark certificate alone established the authenticity of the original agreement and proved the forgery beyond any defense. The Singapore receipt, the taped phone calls, the financial records showing Justin's purchase history from the online vendor, and the wiretap recording of the confrontation formed an airtight case. I testified once, walking the jury through my discovery of the note, the lockpicking procedure I'd performed, and the notary verification method, explaining exactly how an embossed seal differs from a counterfeit stamp. The jury was nodding along. Cassie's public defender advised her to take a plea, and after 3 days of deliberation, she did. She was convicted of forgery in the first degree, criminal possession of a forged instrument, and fraud. The judge, a woman in her 60s who had read every page of the evidence and stared at Cassie over her glasses, noted during sentencing that Cassie's entire scheme was steeped in lies, and she added an unusual condition. Cassie's community service would be performed at a tea processing and packaging facility in Aurora that supplies several major chains. She would hand-sort tea leaves for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, wearing a visible photo ID badge that reads Brewed Betrayal in large letters, along with her name and her status as a convicted felon. The facility set up a camera feed that time stamps every shift, and the first week, a local news crew did a segment on it. Now there's a loop of video online of my daughter, her fingers stained brown, separating stems from whole leaf lots while customers on tours occasionally snap photos of the badge and post them with comments about karma. Justin was convicted of conspiracy and fraud and got 18 months in a federal penitentiary, plus restitution. The slime complained about the food in his first week, according to the case manager. As for me, I got the trademark rights back, along with full ownership of the original blend formulations. Crimson Brew, through Sharon, offered a legitimate deal. I'd supply custom small-batch teas for a new premium line they were launching, and they'd pay me a licensing fee plus a per-unit royalty of 8%. I renamed the company to Steeped in Lies Tea Co. I hired a graphic designer who created a tin that looks elegant and nostalgic, with a delicate botanical illustration of a tea plant on the front, and on the back, just below the steeping instructions, a small QR code. When you scan it, the code takes you directly to the publicly available electronic docket of Cassie's federal conviction, complete with the indictment, the plea agreement, and the final judgment. Each tin also includes a small leaflet that tells the story in plain terms, not out of spite, but because transparency is the best disinfectant. Every order I ship is a little piece of proof that the truth, like a well-steeped oolong, only gets stronger with time. I still visit Tom's grave every month. I tell him about the new blend I'm working on called Husband's Warning, a dark, malty Assam with a long finish and a hint of clove. I thank him for the note and the USB drive and the paranoia that saved me. Then I go back to the warehouse, where I still roast and blend by hand, and I ship orders to people who have heard the story and want a tea that doesn't just taste like integrity. It comes with a receipt. And if your own child can step over your body to grab a fountain pen, you learn that family isn't blood. It's the people who, even after they are gone, still find a way to protect you. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories about the kind of justice that shows up in a court docket and on a tea tin, hit that like button and subscribe. I'll see you in the next story.